There we
Good
go.
afternoon. My name is David Ewan. It's an honor for me to be able to be a part of this Lunch and Learn program. I want to commend our leadership and the owners of I-10 George Realty and Coldwell Banker Commercial, George Realty, for sponsoring this Lunch and Learn program from 1 o'clock to 2:30. A lot of work has been put into this Lunch and Learn program. And a lot of the information that you will want to ask for is already in PDFs on the email that Peter Camp sent out to everyone. It includes the slides of the presentation that David F. Pio, CCIM, current CCIM instructor of CCIM 101, Financial Analysis. And it includes a list of second PDF of a list of all the classes from CCIM. It also includes a narrative of the CCIM designation, what it stands for. And finally, it includes an application to become a member of the CCIM Greater Los Angeles chapter, which is costs approximately $150, but most likely will be prorated, so it will be much less. I want to be able to say something that I'm very proud of. I'm very proud to be a broker associate of Coldwell Banker Commercial George Realty. I started on March 1st, 2011. I've been with the firm for 14 years nonstop. I went my first 2 years being introduced to the real world called the School of Hard Knocks. I went 2 years without a single listing and a single sale in the field of residential. I am not suited for residential sales. So after a lot of mentoring, a few highly successful businessmen said, David, why don't you do something that you can be good at, and that is commercial sales. So I started in December of 2012 or thereabouts, and I took my very first class called Introduction to Commercial Real Estate at the West San Gabriel Valley Association of Realtors, right over there with Carmela Ma. So that was about 2012. In about 2.5 years, from 2012 to 2015, October 30th of 2015, taking CCIM classes to educate myself on how to properly put together, present a commercial project, how to list it, how to sell it, and how to work with the attorneys and the title company. I was able to, if I could use the expression, instead of shooting small rabbits or small income properties, between 2 to 5, I shot an elephant, 32.6 million, a portfolio. And at the 2% commission for the listing side, which I was representing the listing side, my commission was a modest about 746,000. And after I made my contribution to my uncle IRS and to the governor of the state of California, the Franchise Tax Board, and then I made my generous 6% royalty fee to Edison, New Jersey, and our own company, I ended up with a modest check of only $505,000. Now, isn't that challenging? No, it wasn't challenging. I was thrilled. I was able to pay off loans that I borrowed to get the deal done, but I learned how to do things properly. And the whole purpose of today's session is very, very simple. The purpose of today's presentation is to help you understand and understand how to become proficient commercial real estate agents and brokers. That's the purpose. The second thing is the planning. Once you've nailed down the planning purpose, the planning is how to organize yourself individually if you want to be an individual broker or put together a team to get the work done, to get listings. Mike Ferry said something very, very powerful that hit me like a ton of bricks. He said, if you are a listing agent and listing broker, you are an employer to the borrower's agent. The borrower's agent is working for you, the employer, okay, as an employee. So if you want to be successful, become focused on getting listings for Coldwell Banker, Commercial George Realty, and High-10. You got to be a listing broker so you can control the transaction. CCIM classes will teach you how to be productive, how not to waste your time. So that is the purpose, the planning, the production. And when you put all of those qualities together, what do you have? Profit. You'll become much more productive and profitable in your operations as a real estate agent and broker for Coldwell Banker Commercial George Realty. Now, David Peel, the instructor that's going to present the class with his slides, is an actual current active CCIM instructor. He has a wonderful background. He has a wonderful track record, and we're honored to be able to have him make the presentation to us as a complimentary introduction. This is not costing you one penny. All of the resources and efforts that we've brought is not costing you one nickel, one dime, or one penny. Why? Because we believe in having the right attitude of serving. What does that mean? We're serving you as a family. This is a professional family, and we want you to succeed and win. In the movie Gladiator, Maximus, the hero of the movie, turned to the gladiators on the floor of the Roman Colosseum. He said, if we fight this battle individually, we'll get wiped out. But if we form a circle and work together in unison, in unity, we will survive to live another day. That is extremely important for you to understand. You need to work together as a family. Michelle Olson is a wonderful instructor. Peter Kam is a wonderful instructor, leader, president of our company. He goes out of his way to give us weekly reports on how to stay out of trouble. You want to talk about how easy it is to get into trouble? It's easy. All you have to do is say something incorrectly or allow your client to give you false information that you didn't verify, and you and me, we're all in hot water. But our goal is to make you profitable so that you can become a hero to your family. You can become a hero to your company. Coldwell Banker George Realty, High-10 Partners. You can become a hero to your community and your colleagues. And finally, when you send the emails back to your relatives, wherever they're located, they're going to be proud of you. So with that, I'm going to introduce David F. Peel, CCIM instructor, to give you a very precise vision of how you will be great and profitable in 2025. This year, we want to inspire you to get the listings, not a week from now, tomorrow. We want you to walk out of here with the right attitude. You are no longer wimps, you're warriors. You're like the heroine in the movie Mulan, Hua Mulan, the woman warrior from mainland China that saved the emperor, that saved the kingdom. With that, my introduction is over.
Yeah. And David is.
Thank you.
So we're going to turn it over to David.
Okay, David we're so excited. So take it away. You are co-host.
Awesome. My pleasure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah,
All right.
we can hear you.
Sweet. So let me get things going. And everything's displaying just fine, correct?
Not yet. We don't see. There we go. Your
All
screen
right.
is showing.
Okay, sweet. All right, so welcome everyone. My name is David Pio. I'm a real estate broker by trade up in NorCal. Today I'm going to be presenting to you. Hopefully I should be done by 2:30. I'm going to go just a little bit quicker than normal. I always love David's intro. A taste of CCIM. When is a value add good enough? A commercial real estate story. So before I start, let me start off by saying one thing. Uh, this is not part of the quote unquote official CCIM curriculum. This is something that was developed during the time of COVID over here in Northern California, and it continuously ebbs and flows and changes a little bit depending on who I'm going to present it to and how I'm going to present it. I would have loved to have been there. However, I was in Santa Monica teaching and then in SoCal to meet some people right before ICSC started. In Las Vegas to meet some people before ICSC started, the commercial convention. So to come back home and then take another day off to go present to you guys, I'm sorry, just the schedule wasn't going to work. So with that being said, let me go ahead and get started with a taste of CCIM. All right. So what are our objectives? Number one, we're going to talk about a case study, something that we hear from a client all the time. They want a quote, high return and something with the value add. I can't tell you guys how many times I hear it all the time. And I'm sure all of you, whether you do commercial full-time or whether you do pure residential or whether you do res commercial, or even if you get those millions of texts, I can't really see the classroom, but I'd imagine that everyone here gets those texts probably about 6-7 times a day. Do you have a fix or flip that we can handle? I buy up to $3 million and you never want to respond because you know that if you respond, you're going to get 700 more just like it. So we're going to talk about a client who wants a high return, something with the value add. We're going to talk about the CCIM, cash flow model, and T-bar. Then we're going to define a couple things like net operating income or NOI, gross rent multiplier, GRM, and capitalization rate especially. Then we're going to talk about Summit Apartments. And Summit Apartments is going to be a brief snippet, a little bit nuanced version than what we cover in the actual CCIM curriculum. We're going to talk about the time value of money, the power of the internal rate of return. And then we're also going to talk about what is cap rate and what is yield and how do those two things compare. And then we're going to talk about federal taxation. And lastly, we're going to wrap it up with using the financial before and after tax calculations. Okay, so my little 2-minute commercial. My name is David Pio. I've been a broker since 2006. Actually, I think May 18. Oh my God, it's been 19 years. It's super weird. I started when I was 24 and the world was kind of collapsing. So for any of you that have been around since the 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, that's when I was starting. I was one of those crazy people and somehow I made it through and have been, different levels of success. And I've been very grateful for it. And no complaints. It's been a great ride in the meantime. I speak a couple languages. I speak Spanish. My wife is also Bolivian. My family is Portuguese, so I speak Portuguese. My Spanish is better than my Portuguese. Don't ask how that happened. It's one of the side effects of living in the Bay Area in California. And I also speak Mandarin. My Mandarin at its best used to be almost like a 6-year-old kindergarten kid. Now I'm probably at a preschool level. The reason I speak Mandarin is because when the Chinese were buying everything in California, there was really 2, but kind of 3 big families I was working with in Shanghai, Hangzhou, Wenzhou, and Hong Kong. The Hong Kong was probably only active for about 2 years. I probably spent about an average of a month of my life every single year for about 8 years, from 2010 to about mid 2018 of my life, and somewhere in China, let alone the rest of Asia. And that's why I got to speak Chinese, because it made money and all I had to lock me down back home was my house and a dog that I always had a babysitter for. So that was a fun time. What do I specialize in? I specialize in commercial and investment real estate acquisitions and dispositions. 80% of what I do on a day-to-day basis is apartments. The other 20% varies year by year, but in general, it's about 80% apartment buildings. What I mainly do is what we actually teach in the 4th class of the CCIM curriculum. It's about a week-long class. I look at my clients' portfolios. You own 6 houses, 3 commercial buildings, a retail building, and 18 units spread across 4 properties. I look at that, I see how they're performing, and I tell my clients what they should keep, what they should sell, and why. Because I had those clients that were based internationally, they don't care about politics. They wanted to know who was going to win, how's it going to affect my taxes, and what do I do next. So my clients were always reminded me every 2 to 4 years, whenever there was an election cycle, we don't care. Just let us know what's going to happen or you're fired. So I had to be very up to date with federal, state, and global politics and how it kind of all intertwined with each other. I also do syndications, meaning group investing. My broker and I, we do development and development consulting. He's the developer. I kind of am the workforce in that situation. Here's a very simplified example of what I give my clients when they want me to look at multiple properties. And I kind of turn my little super basic template into something like that. That is a client of mine that I believe had 18 properties, 16 properties, something like that. And I looked at their whole portfolio and I turned it into something like that. And I essentially say, look, everything from the right to the left, you want to keep and hold. Everything from the left to right, you want to sell and exchange. And everything in the gray area is kind of a lateral move. You're kind of going from the left to the right. You're not making money or losing money. It kind of depends. So enough about me. Let's jump into the scenario. I, like many other people, I'm sure you get a client that will touch base with you and say, hey, I'm looking for a project that has a high return, something with a value add component. Actually, you know what? Let me know when you find something that makes more than 10%. Now, if you're anything like me, you would have always said, look, this is unrealistic. This is a waste of my time. I don't really want to talk about it. And if I can tell you a personal story, I literally remember having a client call me in the 2010 days. And for those of us that were around in the 2010 days, we all remember the days when you can either have a decision. You can either buy a fixer-upper home or you can buy a Mazda. And those were some crazy days, right? When you had the decision to make of, do I buy a home for 50 grand or do I buy a really nice Honda Civic with, some of the fancy rims and has a brand new engine that's strapped in, right? It was kind of crazy days, but those were the days. And nowadays you still hear people say, look, I want something that makes this kind of unrealistic return. So that is what you guys are probably thinking right now in your head. And what I'm going to show you is how you can keep that client and show them something that keeps them on the phone and might make both you some money and them some money. So first, let's talk about the T-bar. Here are the components of it. The first thing we care about is the initial investment. How much money is going into the deal? Then we care about the actual cash flows from operations. The third thing is, how much money are we going to sell are we going to make when we sell this property or dispose of this property? And then what's our holding period? Meaning, is this a 3-year deal, a 5-year deal, a 2-year deal? What's our timeline? And in CCIM, we really look at 4 things. And each one of these 4 things are equally important. The first thing is, how many dollars go into the investment? When do those dollars go into the investment? How many dollars come out of the investment? And also equally important, when do those dollars come out of the real estate investment? And all those questions are put on a cash flow model T-bar that looks something a little like this. You have time on the left with a holding period where now is at the top, and as time continues, it moves forward and further and further downward. Everything money related goes on the right. You have your initial investment, which is in parentheses because it's a negative number. It's usually coming out of your pocket as an initial investment. You have your cash flow from operations. And then finally, you have your sale, your cash flow from your sale whenever you dump the property. And when you start plugging in some numbers, there's multiple components and they're represented by numbers and letters. And this is kind of a little more visual version of what we just saw. We have when on the left, we have time period 0, which is essentially today. We have time period 1, whether it's, usually a year or a 2-year or 3-year, continues all the way down to whenever the timeline is going to end. On the right side, you have your initial investment, which is how much money goes in, followed by how much money comes out and when does it come out, both the cash flows from the operation as well as the sales proceeds. Now, I know I can't be there right now, so we're going to do this with a little bit of a handicap. What I want to show you guys is 2 investments. You have investment A on the left and investment B on the right. Hopefully you guys don't have to squint too much. But if you're looking at this, what you're probably seeing is that it's $1,000 deal on both of these investments, meaning it's represented by a negative number. You get $1,000 at the end of year 5, and each investment, one of them makes $100 a year, investment B makes $90 a year. Now, the question I have for you is, with all things being equal, which one are you going to choose? Investment A or investment B? All things being equal. And I'm not sure if I'm able to get those in person to respond, but that's okay. As long-
Investment B?
So if I had a choice to put in $1,000 and get out $1,000 and make $100 a year versus $90 a year, would you rather have the $100 a year or the $90 a year, presuming all the other things are equal? My guess is that
Investment A. Investment A.
good, and I believe that was Jimmy. My guess is that most people are going to say, you know, all things being equal, I'd rather have more money every year. The second example I have is investment A on the left and investment B on the right. Now, they're both still $1,000. They're both still $100 a year. But now the only thing that's changed is investment A has $1,500 when you sell it, and investment B is $1,000 when you sell it. And again, all things being equal, my presumption is that nearly everyone's going to say, hey, at the end of year 5, I'd rather have a larger sales proceeds at $1,500 instead of investment B at only $1,000. So let's do a third one. Same thing, investment A and investment B. The main difference in these is that investment A only cost you $500, whereas investment B cost you $1,000 to get in. And again, if all things are being equal, my guess is that all of us would rather put in less money into a deal if we're going to get the same amount of return. The fourth one, investment A and investment B. They're both $1,000. They both make $1,000, and they also both have a $500 amount that's given to you, with the caveat that investment A is done on year 1 and investment B is done on year 5. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm putting money into a deal, or as I always like to think about it, whether it's an investment or giving a friend money, I don't necessarily want to wait 5 years. If I have the ability to get $500 back earlier, I want my money sooner than later. And I feel like pretty much every single person would rather have their money today versus 5 years in the future, right? And I feel like that's kind of a universal thing. Now, the last investor preference is investment A and investment B. And when you look at these aren't as straightforward, and these are a lot more representative to what you're actually going to see in the investment world. You have investment A and B, they have different amounts in. One is 1,000, one is 800, so it's cheaper. But it makes more money on investment B after 2 years, but then it's got a negative and then a positive in 1,100, where investment A is negative 150, but it has bigger cash flow. So it's not as clean cut and straightforward. And with this is where you start to need to calculate things a little different using yield. But let's cover what we talked about. Assuming everything's the same, we all agree that we'd rather have more money every year. We'd rather have a larger sales price, a lower investment amount. I don't want to put in as much money if I don't have to. And I'd rather have my money sooner than later. And this is how we can start putting things in the cash flow model. And what I'm going to do is first we're going to start at looking a no financing, meaning a cash deal, before tax example. So we have our end of year, aka time on the left, and anything money related on the right. So for year 0, we have our initial investment. And every year after that, we're going to be making our cash flow before tax, followed by our sales proceeds before tax. That'll get us to our internal rate of return. First, let's start with some basic stuff. 1 year measurement, aka direct capitalization. Now, most people know this by the more usual name of cap rate. And cap rate, when you think of cap rate, I want you to think of Uncle Irv. Okay. Really easy to remember Uncle Irv, because the I stands for income, or net operating income to be specific, which we'll cover soon. The R stands for rate, and the V stands for value. Uncle Irv, income divided by rate times value. And if you look closely at the bubble, you're going to see a division line kind of separate the income from the bottom two, and the multiplication sign separating rate from value. Because as long as you know 2 of the 3, for example, if you don't know income, you can multiply rate and value. As long as you know 2 of the 3, you can solve for the third. So if you know the income, you could divide it by the value and get what the cap rate is. And lastly, if you know the income and you know, for example, the market cap rate that things are selling for, you can figure out what the value should be. Okay. So let's do a quick example. For those of you that you can, do me a favor, quit texting, quit checking your email. I promise the deal isn't going to come in. You're not going to get the signed contract in the next 6 minutes. It will come today, but not right now. Get out your calculator, right? Like a simple phone. What I want you to do is I want you guys to solve for this. We're going to try to determine the value. If you have an income of $50,000 and you have a rate of 0.975, and for those of you that are kind of familiar with percentages, for percentages, you need to move the decimal place over, meaning this is actually 9.75. Okay. So I want you guys to take $50,000 and we're going to divide it by 0.0975. And I'll give you guys a second to figure out what you guys get for the value of this property. So if you're typing this in, $50,000 divided by 0.0975 will give you a value of a little less than $513,000. This is very similar to what you see people figure out today. Here's my property. Here's what it makes. What is the market cap? Well, the market cap is 9.75. Well, with that cap rate, your property is worth about $513,000. Similarly, we could do income divided by value, and you can figure out what the cap rate by doing $50,000 divided by 512,821 and figure out that it's a 9.75% cap rate, or as a calculator will display to most people, 0.0975. So now, I told you about the client that touches base and say, hey, I want a good deal. I want something that makes 10% return. The concept of Summit Apartments is something from CCIM. The concept of Summit Apartments is something from CCIM. What I've done is for the taste of CCIM, I've essentially cut and stripped a lot of things of it to make it a little more simplified. We actually go through this in the 101 course over the course of 4.5 days, call it 4 full days, basically from 8:30 in the morning till 5 o'clock at night plus homework. We do it solo, we do it in groups. You're basically given an 18-page packet and you're meant to cover over 22 tasks with it. I'm summarizing this greatly, and keep in mind that in this nuanced example that I applied here, this is actually very similar to a deal I did in, well, multiple deals I did in 2018, 19, 20, and 21. So some of the numbers are a little bit outdated. I'll point them out, but essentially these were stuff that people were able to do for multiple years on end. Okay. With that said, let's continue. So there's a list price of 1.1 million, acquisition costs, closing costs of 11,000. Year one potential rental income of $95,000, but there's going to be some vacancy and credit loss for over 6 years of about 4%, and some operating expenses, which I'm rounding out to $40,000 to simplify things. So the first sheet that we work with is called an APOD sheet, and an APOD sheet tends to be the first sheet you start off with to look at how is a property performing and what is it doing for my client and what could it do for the next investor. So let's start off with the property information, which includes that it's Summit Apartments. It's located in the Bay Area. It was a 6-unit property. We have a purchase price of 1.1 million plus $11,000 in acquisition costs, equals an initial investment of $1,111,000. Our potential rental income I gave, which was $95,000. And we had a 4% vacancy rate. And essentially that's going to take away from my income to get me a different number. And when you take away 4%, that gets me to a gross operating income of $91,200. Now, whether you use it or whether your client's using it, it doesn't matter, because almost always the buyer's going to use it, the other broker is going to use it on the other side of the table. And also, really importantly, the bank is going to use it. So whether you use it or you use a different number, I always love the golden rule. He with the gold makes the rules. And they're going to tell you, and the market's kind of going to guide you what this number is going to be. Now, as you see on the APOD, there's multiple line items: property taxes, property insurance, management, payroll, repairs and maintenance, all the utility bills, all that good stuff. But again, for the sake of simplicity, We're lumping everything into one large sum of $40,000. Now, if you have a property that makes $91,200 after vacancy, and you take away $40,000, you're going to end up with a remaining amount, which is known as your net operating income. This is the really, really important number that we're always after it. This is how much money the property makes after paying for everything, right? After paying for all the repairs, all the maintenance on average, all the utility bills, the trash bills, how much money am I left over? And this is what's going to determine the property value going forward. And the amount is $51,200. So we have our Summit Apartments. We have a cap rate of 4.65%. And the reason that we got that cap rate is we were able to take our $51,200 and divide it by our purchase price, which I showed you guys earlier, of $1,100,000. And that will get us to a cap rate of 4.65. Now, nowadays, it's pretty tough to sell a 4.65 property, especially when you're talking about areas like Santa Monica or close to the water, or excuse me, more inland. But when you get to Santa Monica and really nice places like Ocean Avenue or close to the water, maybe a trophy property might get something like that. But from about 2015 to 2021, 22, 4s and 5% cap rates were pretty normal throughout most of the Bay Area, most of San Diego, most of LA for apartment buildings. This was not something that was, an obscene amount. But wait a second. The guy emailed me and said, I want a 10% return. So who is this silly broker that I'm talking to? Do they just not listen, or do they not know how to do numbers? But they didn't say they wanted a 10% cap rate. They said they wanted a 10% return. So if we're going to talk about cap rate versus yield, we have to look at something called time value of money. And the concept of time value of money means that a dollar received today, also known as present value, has a greater value than a dollar received in the future. Why? Because most of the time, most of us are going to take money and we're going to do something with it. We're going to pay off debt. We're going to invest. We're going to do something that is going to compound our small amount of money to something larger into the future. And this is moving money forward in time. Okay. And on the T-bar, we represent it something like this. You have small money today, but as time continues further and further down on the T-bar, you have a larger money in the future. And we do this by doing some inputs in a financial calculator. Now, in the class, we show you how to go over this calculator, but essentially, let's talk about what this calculator is doing. And let's talk about how compounding works. I'm going to use a really simple example. If you have $100 today and you invest it somewhere that makes 10% a year, what happens after a year? Well, we have the $100 today. We stick it somewhere. Let's call it a bank or something like that. We go to this magical bank that pays 10% every year. And we say, here, bank, here's my $100. Here's my negative $100 going out of my pocket. Money doesn't disappear. It just gets moved from place to place. So here's my $100. And what happens with this 10%? Well, the 10% is going to make it grow by $10. And you take $100 plus my 10% growth. That gets me to $110. Pretty simple. I think everyone got that. But now let's change this just a little bit. Let's say we did not go to the bank and pull out our money, and we kept that $110 an extra year. And in fact, we made this investment not 1 year, but we made it 2 years. Well, now that 10% compounding doesn't just go 10% off of our original $100. It's off of our original $100 and the new interest that just kicked in. So 10% of $110, for anyone that's good at simple moving the decimal point math, is $11. And when you take the $110 that we already had and add another $11, we get to $121. But let's take that same scenario and make it into a third year. So we have this magical bank that pays 10%, $100. That $100 grows to 110. That 110 grows to 121. And now we add another 10% off of the 121, which gets us to another $12.10. So after 3 years, we've now totaled $133.10, and that we can now pull out. And for each year that you keep it in there, the amount of money keeps compounding at a 10% annual return. And that constant compounding, in the financial world, we call it internal rates of return. Now, there's multiple synonyms you're going to hear in the world, and these are just an example of some, as to what is internal rate of return. You might hear words like yield, or interest rate, or a return on, or a discount rate, or opportunity cost. You hear that in business a lot, or a hurdle rate. You have all these different words, depending whether it's an investor or someone on Wall Street or someone listening to Apple on their finance calls or NVIDIA on their finance calls and what they expect to make this year over next year. All those people use the same terminology, and they're all synonyms for the same concept, which is internal rate of return. So let's do an example problem and see how internal rate of return works. If you take a $20,000 investment that's going to make $3,000 per year for 5 years, and at the end of 5 years, you get your original $20,000 back, what is your IRR? And we set up the T-bar looking something like this. We have our 5-year investment with $20,000, which makes $3,000 per year, and I get my $20,000 back. My internal rate of return is 15%. I put in 20. This investment kicks me off 15% every single year, and then I get my $20,000 back. IRR, 15%. But now we're going to change something a little bit. $20,000 in the deal, $3,000 a year, but the big change here is that we're not getting our full $20,000 back. We're only getting 16. Well, now this is a bit of a problem. We can't really do this on our simple phone calculator that easy, because $3,000 is 15% of 20 grand, but I'm not getting my full 20 grand back at the year. But I get it back at the end of 5 years. So how does that all work? Well, if we type this in the financial calculator, I'm not making my original 15%. I'm actually getting less. I'm getting 11.84% because it's looked at the time value of money. And the third alternative is, let's say instead of 20 and let's say 16, let's say we get more money back. We get $24,000 back. Well, again, this is where we need internal rate of return and yield, because yeah, the $3,000 is 15% on my original PV, on my original present value, my original investment, but I'm actually getting a bigger investment in the long run. And if I'm going to do something like this and I add a couple zeros, this starts to look a lot like a real estate deal. How many of us can think about as someone that bought a property, especially if they bought it in, the 2009, 10, 11, 12 days, that he bought a property for $200,000, or add another zero for $2 million, and they made $30,000 a year. And it fluctuates, but let's just say for simplification, it makes $30,000 a year. Yeah, they're making 15% of their money. But how do you account for them selling the property for more money 5 years later, 10 years later, right? Because that's not the same thing as I doubled my money. No, because you also made money that 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 years that you held it, right? And this is where internal rate of return or yield really starts to have its impact and show your clients that there's not just one simple way to look at a property and look at a return. And now we're at almost 17.81. So let me bring this back to this investor preference that we looked at. We had investment A and investment B. We all would rather have less money in the deal, but bigger cash flows and more money at the end, and more money now versus more money later. And with what we teach you in CCIM, we teach you how to use these financial calculations so you can determine that they're not the same, that investment B actually makes a higher return of 16.97 versus 14.47. So I'd rather have investment B, but before that, you couldn't figure this out so easily. It wasn't as cut and dry as the other deals. Now, in order to do this, like I mentioned, I keep mentioning the calculator. And unfortunately, I don't have the time to teach this calculator. To teach the calculator and the methods that we do it and make sure that you guys are really confident in what you're doing. This thing takes about 8 to 10 hours to teach a class. And I'm sorry, this is a taste of CCIM. I don't have time to show you guys how it works, but just trust me that all these numbers are correct. Now, let's go back to that client. I want something that makes, 10% value add, a really high return. Now you guys are still thinking unrealistic waste of time. But wait, let's add something to this. They might not just be talking about cap rate. They might also be talking about yield. And for example, we have property A, property B, and property C. I've discussed briefly how to calculate the cap rate. And when we look at property A, it's $100,000, $10,000 rate of return. Okay, or $10,000 for the first year, which is a cap rate of 10%. Property B only makes $5,000, which is a cap rate of 5%. Sounds a lot like California. And property C makes $15,000, but it's a cap rate, so it's a cap rate of 15%. Now we're starting to get into something where people want to go out of state, Alabama, North Dakota, Ohio, things like that, because they want that annual cash flow, which I get. But let's also look at yield, because yield isn't just the cap rate that you see on year one. It's also the growth, whether that growth is in income or whether that growth is in the property being the property appreciation. So if you have property A and you put it in for 100,000, it makes 10 grand its first year. It's a cap rate of 10%. And if you only get back your original $100,000, there's no growth. You have a yield of 10%. Property B, which I love to compare to California, is I buy something for 100, I get back 5,000. That's a 5% cap rate. But one of the biggest reasons people were buying in California up until extremely recently is because there's always that growth, right? The growth wasn't a little bit, the growth is a lot. So I buy 100,000, I make 5, and then my property grows by an additional 5. So I have 5% in cap rate, 5% in annual growth. That's a yield of 10%. Whereas in property C, maybe they built identical newer building right next door, and now your property isn't worth as much because now you have new competition that you didn't have a year ago, and your property went down in value. So sure, you have a high cap rate, but now your property value went down by 5,000 and you have negative growth, which means your yield is still 10%. So let's look at a Summit Apartments Part 2. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this over a longer horizon than just 1 year. And yes, it is impossible to predict the future. However, doesn't mean you can't make educated guesses and look at historical trends and at least have an argument to your thoughts. So we're going to plug in a growth rate of 7%. Expenses are going to grow by 3%. And at the end of year 5, we're going to sell the property to the next buyer at a 5 cap. And for anyone who's ever dabbled in commercial, this is basically 2012 to 2022. This was a 10-year thing that you could do without mistake. Okay. We're going to have a 4% cost of sale price. And now we're going to shift a lot of the information that we took from the APOD, from that 1-year sheet, right, which is mimicked here, and we're putting it over the course of 5 years. Okay. What we're doing is we're going to grow the income by 7% each year. We're still going to have the vacancy, and the expenses are still going to grow as well, which gets us to our net operating income. And we're going to bring all these numbers down on the sheet. They're all going to mimic each other. And we're going to carry this on for years 2, 3, 4, 5, and year 6. Now, we're not going to own it in year 6, but there's a very important reason why we're going to do these numbers to a year that we're not going to own it. And it's going to have to do with the sale. Now, we need our initial investment because that goes into our cash flow model, which I've shown you guys before. And all these years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are all going to get plugged in from the sheet of our net operating income, our cash flow before tax. The last thing is we have our sales proceeds before tax. And again, let me reiterate this. You never know what a property is going to sell for, but at least you can make an educated guess. Okay. And the corporate groups do it all the time, and the institution groups do it all the time. And let me tell you what else. The groups that are handling your pension money and your Roth, your 401ks, if you're not doing it yourself, they're doing it as well almost every quarter. And with that, that's where we need our year 6 net operating income. Because even though we're not going to own it this year of year 6, we need to see what is it worth to the next buyer that's going to come in and look at this thing. And we all know our Uncle Irv, right? Well, we know what our projection for year 6 net operating income is going to be. And again, I can't tell the future, but I'm going to buy this thing at a 4.5 cap. And I'm going to say that the cap rate stays the same, maybe goes down a little bit, not in my favor. And I'm going to sell it at a cap rate of 5%. Right? And again, as long as I know 2 of the 3, I can figure out the 3rd. Now, let me do a little visual as to what's going to happen. We're going to hold this property for 5 years, years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then ultimately, we're going to sell it at the end of year 5 using what we're expecting is going to be year 6 net operating income. But even though we're not going to sell it, a new investor B with a new perspective is going to come in and look at purchasing it as their new cap rate. So our old NOI on year 6 is the new owner's NOI for year 1. So again, we have our income and we have our 5% cap rate represented as 0.05. That's going to get us to a value of $1.63 million. And with that, we could plug this into our sheet, which just looks at all the line items that it takes to sell a property. So we bought it for 1.1 million. We're selling it at a 5% cap rate, which gets us to a 1.63 million sale. We have our sales price, we have our cost of sale, and if we bought this place all cash and paid 4% for cost of sale, whether it be commissions or closing costs, whatever it may be, we have our sales proceeds before tax. We're walking away with almost a little more than $1.5 million. Hopefully I haven't lost anyone yet. A lot of numbers, but at least you guys are seeing it. And if you guys received the slides on PDF, you could kind of look at the sheets and follow along. This is meant to go a little fast because, again, this is just a taste of what you can learn in the CCIM curriculum. And now we have our T-bar, and we can solve something called our internal rate of return, that whole thing I was talking about. But now these are much more realistic numbers to our incoming investor. So our investor is going to buy this for 1.1 million. He's going to have he or she's going to have all these cash flows and sell the property. And with that, our client's going to have an internal rate of return of almost 12%. So let's talk about what our client asked us for. Oh, I need something multifamily with a high return, something that's like value add. Actually, let me know when you find something that makes 10%. And normally, most of you, like I used to, would just say, thank you, I'm busy, goodbye, and hang up. Because we always view these people as unrealistic and a waste of time. But now, how are they looking at this 10%? Is it a cap rate? Are they looking at it over a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year horizon? Right? Is this a multi-year investment plan? Because now things start to change. Maybe I can't make you 10% year over year, but if you're talking about appreciation and, let's try to see if we have an agreement on how much properties are appreciating, either with rent growth or you fixing it up, maybe I could get you that 10% and I don't just have to hang up on you like I used to. Because see, there's more than one way to run a property. There's the ways like gross rent multiplier, but it just looks at the potential rental income. The cap rate, which I mentioned, looks at vacancy and expenses, and it gets all the way down to the net operating income. CFBT stands for cash flow before tax. That does the same thing. But the only difference between cap rate and the cash on cash and cash flow before tax is that cap rate doesn't look at a loan. The cash on cash adds a loan to it. It adds debt. And cash on cash is represented as a percentage rate, similar to cap rate, whereas cash flow before tax is the actual dollar amount. How much money am I actually getting? Internal rate of return can also account for taxes, cost of sale, if there's any taxes when you sell the property, gain, depreciation, recapture, things like that, and time value of money. Is this a 2-year deal or a 5-year deal? Is this a development deal? And actually, if you're really looking at a development deal and you're looking at multiple deals, this is where capital accumulation comes in. Because capital accumulation can judge between, or can compare between $1 million deal and a $4 million deal, a $600,000 deal and a $400,000 deal, a 1-year hold versus a 4-year hold, and it knows how to do this. But the problem is I don't have enough time to explain all this to you because I don't have 4 full days to teach you some of this curriculum and then more, and then some. But I still have more for you guys, okay? Let's talk about deductions. Sprinkle in a little bit of deductions in here. So let me take a pause real fast. Let me do a caveat here. And I'm going to say something that you guys have heard from David and Peter and every broker you've ever heard from or worked with. We're not accountants. However, you're allowed to do basic math and understand how basic tax concepts work. And I'm going to add the caveat that I say to everyone. I'm not an accountant. I don't know your taxes. Let me tell you how this stuff works. Hell, let me do some really basic math on a worst case scenario, and let's email your accountant together so your accountant can see that I'm not just the quote unquote dumb broker. Because I don't know if you guys know, most of our reputation, right? And there's always that 5% of people that kind of ruin it for a lot of us, is that most people in the professional business world view most real estate agents as not that skilled. You're a professional house shower, you write up a contract and you get a big check. Oh, what did you do to deserve this? One of my favorite ways to make new clients is by talking to their accountants, because usually one of two things happen. Number one, I always tell my client that I'm not an accountant, but I'm pretty good at taxes. Here's some rough numbers, and I know it's not you. I don't know your write-offs. I don't know your loss carry forwards. I don't know how many kids you got. And honestly, I don't really want to know. So why don't you take this, show it to your accountant, but I bet I'm within a margin of error of 10%. And every single time I'll have the accountant bring me into the deal and we'll work on the numbers, and they work on the pure tax strategy and I work on the pure real estate strategy. And hey, if we sold it for this, how does it impact their taxes? Literally on Zoom or in person with their accountant. My favorite story is that I literally once had an accountant hit the reply all button and not realize that I was CC'd. The accountant was, in their 60s. They weren't super computer savvy. And the accountant literally responded with, I've never seen a broker get this in detail about tax. They even say they're not an accountant, but they're only about 8% off of the number. But they put in the email the caveats that I know I'm not right, but I'm probably within a margin of error of 10%. They knew about depreciation, cost recovery or capture, and, which was one of the funniest ones, which I teach in the classroom, is why in the hell, why does any broker know what a mid-month convention is? That is one of the most minutia, tedious, small things that only accountants know. Why does this broker even know it? Whoever he is, never lose him. And I've gotten 2 clients from that accountant in the last 8 years. Because I know I don't know taxes, but I can at least talk some basic numbers. Hey, I see what you bought it for. I see what you sold it for. I'm not an accountant, but here's some really basic stuff. Let's involve your accountant and let's expand this together. And I become more like a broker consultant than just a pure, let me list your property or let me help you buy a property. It starts to become a team. And I'm brought into that team with equal respect as I am with an accountant or the finance person or the attorney. Okay. So again, I'm going to add the caveat, you're not accountants, but this is some of the stuff we teach in CCIM. So the financing impact of taxation. When you have a loan, and with every property, you get to deduct interest, you get to deduct the loan cost amortization, and you get to depreciate the property. Additionally, you get to, when you sell the property, any unamortized loan costs you get to depreciate. Now, in the US, we have a thing called progressive tax rate. And what that means is that as you make more money, they're almost like pockets. And we explain this a little more in detail in class. Depending on how you file, things get taxed at different rates, right? And this is, again, why I always reiterate, I am not an accountant, nor do I want to be your accountant. Every year I have to update this, and I hate it. So in the CCIM world, we always use the worst case scenario of the highest federal tax bracket. And that's because in the real world versus tax world, depending on how you make your money, things get taxed differently. Ordinary income and real estate rental income is taxed at a margin of 37% on the federal level once you hit the highest rate. Capital gains, most people know, is 20%. The section 1250 recapture for real property is at 25, but for personal property, it's 37%. That's jumping in the line of businesses and hotels and things like that. So let's go to Summit Apartments. No financing yet, but after taxes. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the county assessed value and apply some of these rates. And what we're going to do is we need to figure out how much of this building is land versus improvements, because you can't write off land, but you are able to write off improvements. And it turns out the improvements are 80% of the value. And we pull this from county records, especially in California. Other states, you have to do it a little differently. And with that, you find out that, hey, an apartment building, you can write off over 27.5 years. Or if you want to get really specific, over each year of your full holding, you get to write it off by 3.636%. And all of your years that you buy and sell it, we have that mid-month convention. It's a smaller percentage. So again, I don't have time to run the numbers on this, so you guys just got to trust me. On day 3, we spent about 6 hours on how to run numbers on taxes and how to do it step by step by step, so you guys can go home and do it on your own properties and with your clients for warm examples. And with that, we're going to deduct all the property, okay? And we deduct it at a rate of almost $31,000 for the first year, which gives us a real estate taxable income of $20,000. So let me reiterate this. The property made $51,000, but we get to take a $31,000 deduction, which means we only have to pay taxes on $20,000. And because we're paying a rate of 37%, that means our tax bill is only $7,500. So let me take a pause. Your property made $51,000, but you're only going to pay $7,500 of taxes to get to your cash flow after taxes. Year 2, you get a $32,000 deduction, and you continue this process year after year after year after year for all 5 years of your holding period. And again, I apologize, I don't have the time to do a deep dive on this, but trust me when I say these are the numbers. So we're going to apply everything to the T-bar again. We have our initial investment of $1,111,000. We bought this cash. We have all these cash flows after taxes, right? So this is what we're actually going to walk away with after paying the tax bill for years 1 through 5. And we have our sales proceeds. Sales proceeds is a little nuanced though, because we got to take all these deductions, but now we have to pay these deductions back. I always liken this to having a friend that works at the bar. We all either were or had, or maybe if you're lucky enough, you still have that friend that works at the bar, right? You go to the bar. We all have that friend that works at the bar, or used to maybe in our college days. You go to the bar, and we all know that our friend's not going to charge us for the alcohol. Our friend's either going to give us a super, super sweet discount if they're going to charge us anything at all. But when you leave the bar, you can't just not pay for anything. What do? You always slip your friend a nice, fat, solid tip. It's a way bigger tip than you would have paid in the first place if you just bought the drinks outright. But that tip that you just paid is way, way, way less than if you had to pay full price if you were just a regular customer. And that's how I liken cost recovery depreciation. You got to take all those discounts year over year over year. But at the end, they're going to do some math to figure out how much did you take, and you got to leave us a fat tip. And that's called cost recovery depreciation, or excuse me, cost recovery recapture. So you add up all those numbers to figure out what's called your adjusted basis. And from your basis, you need to figure out how much of this is allocated towards the cost recovery, AKA the free drinks at the bar from your friend, versus how much is allocated to the property going up in value, your gain from appreciation. Because those things are taxed at 2 different levels. One is taxed at 25%, and the other one is taxed at 20%. But whether it's 25 or 20, what I know is that both of those numbers are way, way less than our ordinary income tax rate of 37%. So we're going to walk away with $1,435,000. And I know this is a lot of numbers, and I know I'm going relatively fast with a lot of these numbers, and I'm not doing a deep dive. And that's because I don't have time. This is not meant to show you guys everything from start to finish. It's meant to give you guys a taste of what we have in the class. So you have your sales proceeds after tax. And when we do our internal rate of return, we have an after-tax no financing, internal rate of return of 9.4. So the property before tax did 12%. After tax does about 9.5. Are you 100% sure it's going to do those numbers? No, but you're allowed to make an educated guess. Are you 100% sure that's your client's tax rate? Absolutely not. But are you allowed to kind of discuss these concepts and hopefully show, shine to your client and have your account give you the cosign that you really know what you're talking about? Absolutely. And if let's say your numbers were perfectly right, which they're never going to be, but for the sake of class argument, let's say they are, what is your client actually paying as a tax rate, as their effective tax rate? I know they're supposed to pay 37% because they're in the highest income federal tax bracket, but they're actually paying 21%. So when I have clients say, why buy real estate? Well, number one, you can compete and make pretty darn good returns, not just in cap rate, but in yield. And also, you don't pay as much in taxes because you have all these deductions. And a lot of times I'll get from my investor, that's it. Look, 12% isn't bad, but there has to be better alternatives, right? Like bonds or stocks. And, maybe you're thinking, you know what? You're right. Maybe I can't compete with those yields. Maybe buying something else is better. And this is where I start to add another layer. And I always remind myself, look, my clients are bad people because for some people, greed, for lack of a better word, is just in their DNA. It's good. This is their livelihood. These are their investments. So now let's add financing and taxes. We're all familiar with the TVAR, initial investment, cash flows after tax, sales proceeds after tax. Here's what we're doing. The initial investment is going to change a little bit. Now we're going to look at loan costs and a mortgage because we're not coming out of pocket as much money. For the cash flows, we have the real world and we have the tax world. And in the real world and the tax world, you both have net operating income. But as I mentioned earlier, you get to take deductions like cost recovery, which gets you to your taxable income. That you multiply by your marginal tax rate. It's important to remember that cash flow is not your taxable income. And when it comes to your sales proceeds after tax, we have our sales price and our cost of sale, but we have to look at adjusted basis. What is in the eyes of the government, what's our property worth? And for that, I need to know my original basis. Did I do any capital improvements? How much cost recovery did I already take? Basis and partial sales, and that gets me to my adjusted basis. And then that's when I get to account for my cost recovery and my capital gain. And that gets me to my sales proceeds after tax. So with finance after tax, but what we're going to do is we're going to add a loan. We have financing now. And these terms, man, I missed 3%. But these terms were super normal from, call it 2012 to 2022. And for anyone that's been around long enough to do it, you either did it or know someone that did it. We all know those people used to get loans under 2%. It was very normal to get a 3.5, high 3, maybe 4% rate for apartments with 25 to 30% down. Very, very normal. Obviously, the rates don't work like this anymore. I don't expect them to ever come back to, at least in the relatively near future. But I'm excited for the day where one day it gets back down to 5, however long that may or may not take. So what we're going to do is after we calculate the loan, we have our annual debt service, right? What am I paying for principal and interest payments each year? $41,000, which leaves me with my cash flow. But now we need to do this with our write-offs. And most people know that when you have a loan, you can write off the interest, but you can't write off the principal. So how do we work with that? Well, we have our mortgage data, right? We have our payment for the month, our payment for the year, how much did it cost in loan fees and points. We have our mortgages, and now we're only out of pocket at about $300,000. For our interest, we have to split up the principal and the interest. And for anyone who's familiar with it, what happens with each payment is that even though your payments might remain the same for principal and interest, every single one of your payments, it changes as time goes on. We've all seen those charts where, the first couple of years you're paying in your mortgage, you have a little tiny principal payment, and almost the entire rest of it is interest. But then as time goes on and around year 5, 10, 15 start kicking in, it starts to be about half. And then by the end, you're paying almost all principal and only a little bit, tiny bit of interest. Well, at the end of the timeline, that little tiny bit of interest is what you can write off, even though your payments remain the same. And the inverse is true. In the very beginning, you get that big interest payment, but you don't get to write off that little bit of principal that you're paying off. And you need to account for that because each year, each month, it's going to change every single time you go on. So here you are, you write off your interest for your first year, $24,500. And as time goes on, that interest is going to shrink. You also get to write off your loan fees. So whatever you spent in points, whatever you spent paying for the appraisal and anything that had to go along with the loan, you get to write it off. And now I want to take a pause here right a second. And let's look at our net operating income. Our net operating income, the amount of money the property made before paying the loan, is $51,200. Most of us are familiar that we get to write off the interest on the property, on whatever loan we have. So that took away $24,500. But remember those cost recovery, that deduction, the depreciation, we still get to write that off. That's almost $31,000. And we get to write off the points. So our property is making $51,200 minus the interest deduction, minus the property depreciation, the cost recovery, and the loan fees. We have a negative 4702. What does that mean? That actually means that in the eyes of the government, not including obviously any other part of the taxes, which is, again, I'm not an accountant, but in regards of the government of this property, my property on paper lost money. And I don't know if you guys know this, but when you lose money, you get a deduction. I'm actually going to essentially get, for lack of a better expression, a credit of $1,740 by owning a property that made $51,000 and after paying the loan made $9,500. So my cash flow after taxes is over $11,000. This is a small snippet as to why people look at buying real estate. Things like this were very routine for myself and my competitors and those in my office that did similar sales, that we were able to find stuff, not necessarily at this caliber, but this kind of stuff is what excited our clients. That you could buy a property that makes money, that pays off the loan, that has growth, and I don't pay taxes. There's not a lot of opportunities like that. And you continue this on for year 2, which still is a deduction, 3, all the way to year 5. I don't need to worry about deductions in year 6 because I'm not going to own it. It doesn't impact how the sale works. So that's why I'm not extending it all the way to year 6. And with that, I need, again, not my purchase price, but I need my initial investment. How much money am I coming out of pocket? Almost $300,000. And then I need to go back to my cash flows after taxes and apply that. And again, guys, I'm really sorry I can't really do a deep dive on this, but I don't have the time. Some of the stuff I just taught you guys, when it comes to writing off the property, when it comes to writing off the interest, we spend about 4 or 5 hours learning how to do write off on interest and writing off loan points. We do it on the final day. Okay, this is not stuff I can teach in an hour and a half, Zoom webinar, even in person. Okay. Then we have our cash flows, and then our sales proceeds before tax, which start to get really detailed. Now we've already done all this, but now what we're adding is we get to write off our points, and we have to pay back the loan. Well, whatever points I haven't written off, I get to accelerate everything and write it off today, and I get to write it off at 37%. And even though I got a big loan, after 5 years, I don't owe the same amount. We show you guys how to figure out exactly how much money do you owe on the loan month by month and year by year. And I need to pay that loan back. And the loan balance remaining is 733,000, which means that my sales proceeds before tax is 832. I have those two taxes I need to worry about, as well as a credit on the loan points I haven't got to write off. So I'm going to walk away with about $705,000. That is my sales proceeds after tax. And from this, we can calculate internal rate of return. And our internal rate of return with financing after tax is almost 23%. Now, I didn't do the with financing before tax. I skipped that step just so I could go ahead and accelerate this for time and do the with financing after tax. But before tax and before doing the deductions for the interest, the property IRR was 27%. After tax, it's just shy of 23%. And again, our client using the highest income tax rate on the federal level is 37%. But what is the client actually paying effectively? What are they really paying? And they're really paying about 15%. And one of the things that you guys that we teach on the first day is we teach about how do other assets work. And when I say other assets, I'm talking about on the first day, we talk about assets like bonds and stocks. And how does the S&P 500, the largest 500 companies in the USA in an index, as well as the Dow Jones, the big top 30 companies, how does that look over a trend of not a 1 or 2 or 3 years? How does it look over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? How does it look at like since the 70s? And we look at the trends of bonds and stocks versus, generally speaking, commercial real estate on an institutional level. And what you find is that stocks tend to do an average of about 10 to 14% a year, give or take, right? There's good years, there's bad years, there's great years, there's terrible years. And if you're able to compete with that 10 to 14%, that's when you can start having clients say, I know I've got a lump sum in my stock portfolio and it's doing great. But there's a certain point where something like what happens 2 months ago scares people and the stocks goes down. And when those things happen, investor clients tend to get scared and go, that's right, I need to diversify, but I still want to make 10 to 14%. And if you're able to even compete with that, with real estate before taxes, let alone after taxes, that's where you start getting investor clients really, really, really excited. So with that being said, why become a CCIM? There's over 9,000 CCIMs worldwide, from Canada to Mexico, Guam, Poland, China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. They have huge chapters in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. I've actually went to the Taiwan graduation twice. It's incredible. It's like ours here. They have like a full families come, like over here, families don't come, but it's still a good 150, 200 people each time. But families, and they rent out an entire almost mid-sized arena for this thing with a cap and gown. It's pretty incredible, right? It takes your average person 2.5 to 3 years to finish this. People do it shorter, people do it longer. CCM speak the same language as really sophisticated investors, institutional acquisition managers, and CPAs, right? I'll have guys sitting there with their CPAs or CFA 1, CFA 2, and their MBAs. Now I don't have an MBA, and we'll sit there and they'll talk and they'll ask me where I got my MBA. Did I go to Haas? Nope. Did I know their instructor? Nope. Right? Just CCM taught me a whole lot. We also understand things like depreciation, interest payment deductions. There's a Ward Center class, which is like our elective courses about cost segregation and accelerated appreciation. How do you take all those property deductions and kind of smush them up into year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of waiting 27.5 years or 39 years? And the biggest reason to become a CSAM, it's to expand your knowledge of the commercial real estate business, to expand your profession, and hopefully expand the wallets not only of your clients, but of yourselves. So that is a taste of CCIM. When is a value add story, value add good enough, a commercial real estate story. So thank you guys. I made it a little under time, so glad I was able to do that.
That was very good and very informative. Thank you so much.
Welcome, my pleasure.
And David's coming back up. I'm gonna put the camera over to David and put the camera on. There we go.
Thank you for attending this lunch and learn program on May 21st. If you have any questions, you can call David Peel. If you have any questions that you would like to ask me, you can call me. You can email me. We will attend to answering your questions. I encourage you to consider the journey of just taking one class. It could be the introduction to commercial real estate, which is a 2-day class, about $195. You can take CCIM 101. It's about $1,500 to $1,600. If you join the national chapter, you get a $500 discount. Coldwell Banker Commercial gives you another 10 to 20% discount. By now it's all over. It's a very small investment in your future. You know, I started approximately starting in 2011, March 1st, when I joined the firm, took my first class in 2014. I got my PIN on April 11, 2018. That's about 4 to 4.5 years. This is the PIN that I'm wearing right now. When I started my journey in June of 2012, I had a financial net worth of 0. Okay. However, after I got my PIN, I have a net worth significantly larger than 0. Okay. I just bought a home in Arcadia for 1.4 million. Okay. That home is 1,700 square feet, 4 bedroom, 3 bath. When I joined Coldwell Banker on March 1st, we were living in a 3 bedroom, 1 bath home, 1,056 square feet that I bought for $485,000. I just sold it for $850. Okay, so that's the appreciation of real estate. However, the value of what I accomplished, by the way, you may not know it, but I have 5 children and I have 8 grandchildren. Okay, I have become a hero to those 5 children, 8 grandchildren, and on Mother's Day, we're in Glendale, California at the Panda Inn because that's where we can get the orange chicken, the pungent orange chicken. I'm a hero to my children and my grandchildren. What we're trying to do is to give you the knowledge and the information. What we're trying to inspire you to greatness. Okay. I know all of you are tigers. You're not pussies. All of you here are tigers. You're just like Juan Mulan. Okay. I've watched Mulan probably 30 times. I've watched Gladiator about 100 times. Okay. When you come to work, you're no longer coming to work as a realtor. You're coming to work as a warrior. And in battle, you're willing to fight to the death to live one more day. That's what we call mucho macho coreano. By the way, I'm of Korean ancestry, so I'm trying to use some humor here. But all of you are destined for greatness. But it all comes together when you understand that you are born for greatness. Here's what I learned, and this is my secret formula for success. Even though you may learn all this information, you need to remember that the intangible qualities that come from our Asian heritage. Number 1, you are courageous. Number 2, you have character and integrity. Number 3, you have commitment to get the job done for your family, for your clients, and for your community with no excuses. Number 4, you have capital management skills to know how to make money. Making money is a very simple formula. All the income that comes in is larger than the expenses going out. But with the calculator that you get from CCIM 101 and the mentoring you'll get from me, from David Peel, you'll all become wealthy. I'm talking about wealthy. I'm not talking about peanuts. I want you to have big potatoes, okay? So if you have courage, if you have character, commitment to get the job done, capital management skills, you will have a caring attitude for your clients. They'll be coming back to you time and time again because, hey, you made money for me. Let's do it again. And so with that, I want to thank you for attending. Feel free to look at the last email that Peter Cam sent you because it has the slides. It has the list of CCIM classes. It has a list of the CCIM designation. If you take a look at the websites for CBRE, for Cushman and Wakefield, Jones Lang LaSalle, Remax Commercial, all of the firms, the top guns have the acronym behind their name CCIM. That means you're part of an elite group of top guns. And it all begins with the first step. Some of you may take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
What does CCIM stand for?
It stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. So if this is the pin that designates that I am a CCIM designee. I've earned this pin. But to earn the pin, you have to submit a portfolio of actual proven closed sales. You have to take 4 classes that are a week long. You have to take a final exam. And it's not easy. It's really, really rigorous. You know, we have a gentleman, I think I can talk about it, but we have a gentleman in our Alhambra office who is passed 4 of the classes. I have encouraged him to just sit and take the final exam. Okay. I don't think I should just mention his name, but I can tell you that we have many, many people that have taken 1 class, 2 classes, 3 classes. But for some reason, beyond my understanding, the passion, they've run out of the passion to get the pin. The pin is very hard to understand because once you get it, you become part of a community of top guns. You go to the 2 governance meetings and you begin to share ideas, share information. Then we have a CCIM website. You have a question, it goes out to all 9,500 of CCIMs, and then you get responses back. If you want to learn the leasing broker or the leasing contact for In-N-Out Burger, they'll tell you exactly the name and the phone number. That's how powerful it is. You can't do that without the inside connection. But all you need to do is Google CCIM. There's lots of information on why it's valuable. You can call David Peel and ask him, hey, David, I'd like to just, when the next time you're down in Los Angeles, I want to take you to NBC Seafood Restaurant. I want to have a lunch with you, and I want to have you explain to me again why it's so valuable. Okay, it's really, it's not a cost, it's an investment. It's an investment in your career. And I can only tell you that I have no regrets. I'm thrilled and honored that I made the investment because it paid off. My wife is thrilled with the new home. You know, with 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. One of the bedrooms is my office at home. Second bedroom is her office at home. The 4th bedroom is our guest bedroom, and the last bedroom is our master bedroom. All I can say is that real estate is worth the investment because it appreciates over time. The West San Gabriel Valley Association of Realtors about 3 months ago had a representative from the LA County Assessor's Office. And he says, you know, we've had good times, we've had bad times, but look at this slide here. For the last 12 years or 10 years, the valuation of all residential or commercial properties has consistently appreciated 2 to 3% every year. Every year in a vertical line, in a diagonal line going vertically. You can't lose by helping your clients acquire more property. You can't lose by acquiring real estate for your own family portfolio. One of the things that I do, which I'll share with you, whenever I find a property that I think is worth presenting to one of my clients, I will ask a very simple question. Would I consider buying this property as an investment? And once you look at it with the lens, hey, this property, I would be willing to put my own money to buy this property, you will have the enthusiasm to present it to your clients with a sparkle in your eye and with the numbers to make him say, yes, let's prepare a letter of intent. Let's make an offer. With that, I want to say thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, David. That was such a great presentation and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very grateful. Thank you so much. We enjoyed it very much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thanks,
David.
Thanks, David.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.